Hi, everyone. I see people are still trickling in, so I'll wait about a minute or so till we get started.
Yes, we have a very large group coming today.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in our webinar, Threats in 5G, Securing the Attack Surface. My name is Christopher Pineda, and I'm a Territory Account Manager for Virginia. And I'm joined by Jack Van Schoenenberg, who is one of the two Territory Account Managers for Pennsylvania, as well as Kumi S. Wadachandran, who is our local 5G application engineer. A few things about our webinar platform. You're probably in the window view where you are able to ask a few questions on the right side of the desktop. You will also be able to come off mute if you want to ask questions directly back and forth at the end of our presentation. We ask that you fill out a short survey that will be sent at the end. I think there will also be a little short prompt that is really easy to fill out, and we really appreciate you filling this out so we can address your needs in a virtual setting. I'm very excited for our presentation today. Thanks, Kumi. Please take it away.
Hi, my name is Kumi Iswarachandran, and I am a wireless solutions engineer with Keysight Technologies. Today we're going to be talking about threats in 5G, securing the attack surface. So we will start off with talking about our Keysight 5G solutions portfolio. It's a very large portfolio. So I want to focus on two items, a network emulation system that we have and an RF sniffer. And as we go along, we're going to introduce some security concepts. And in explaining those security concepts, we will work our way through two attack examples. The first one is connecting to an untrusted network, and the second one is a privacy attack. But we will talk about security concepts to explain them as we talk through the examples. So let's start off with the 5G portfolio of Keysight. Some of you may have noticed, may have seen this diagram in the past, so you might be familiar with it. Those of you that are not familiar with it, that's okay. We're just going to focus on this network emulation system we have. We call this the 5G UXM. And then on the top here, we have the WaveJudge 5000, which is an RF sniffer. The RF sniffer will be working with a Cipher Judge, which you will see that shortly. And then with UXM 5G, we're going to be using a tool. It normally works with a piece of software called TestApp. TestApp controls the UXM 5G. We have another tool called PRT, which can also control the UXM 5G. And PRT is called Protocol R&D Toolset. And that works with the UXM 5G. So it works in this way. The PRT will run on a test PC that controls the UXM, and the UXM will be connected to a device under test. And PRT has quite a bit of flexibility here. It has a scripting language where we can change messages, we can change the contents of messages, we can even reorder the messages, we can send different messages, everything within 3GPP spec. And there's quite a bit of settings that you can change and adjust. So it's a very powerful, flexible tool. And we're going to be using that tool to for one of our attack scenarios of connecting to an untrusted network. So the Cipher Judge is a tool that works with the WaveJudge, the 5000, the RF sniffer. And the way the Cipher Judge works is the Cipher Judge uses a plug-in point where you remove the SIM card from the user equipment, and then you plug the SIM card into the Cipher Judge, and then there's an echo. I don't know if someone can fix that. Thank you. And then you plug the cable from the Cipher Judge directly into the slot where the SIM card fits in. So that way, the Cipher Judge now sits in between the SIM card and the mobile unit, and it's able to sniff off the traffic encryption keys. It passes that to our WaveJudge software, which then passes it to the WaveJudge 5000, and the WaveJudge sniffs the packets over the air, and it's able to use that traffic encryption key to not only decrypt the messages, but also the user traffic. So we'll be trying to use this in one of our examples. But first, we want to talk about how trust is established in the digital world. So I want to start with an example that you're very familiar with. This is Windows. When you run an executable in Windows, you get this pop-up message occasionally which says Windows protected your PC, and it's giving you a don't run button. If I click this more info, I see that this setup exe is from an unknown publisher, but I do get this run anyway option, which then Windows again pops up another warning. So Windows here is saying that this setup exe that you've chosen to run is now trying to make changes to your device. So do you really want to continue? Well, if I click more details here, I see that this executable is sitting in this PRT install folder. And essentially, I know where I downloaded this. I downloaded this. This is the PRT setup executable, but Windows doesn't know. So Windows doesn't trust it. And how does that trust work? How does that digital trust work? So we're going to talk about trust in a communication line. And what we're going to see is that the Windows example is also similar in mechanism to the way we establish trust in a communication line. So let's first start off with mutual authentication in communications. You want to know if you're sending messages from one endpoint to another endpoint, you want to know that you're speaking to that endpoint and that your messages are, for instance, not going to a different endpoint. That's one issue. So you want to essentially authenticate the endpoint you're communicating with. Another mechanism we have here is that when you're sending your messages, are they potentially eavesdropped? And if they are, is the eavesdropper able to understand those messages or decrypt them? So now, with those concepts, we're going to look at our first example, connecting to an untrusted network. But we want to know how we set up this trust. And the trust is set up with certificate-based trust, which is established by X509 certificates. X509 is an ITU-T standard, and that essentially is International Telecommunications Union telecommunications sector standardization standard. What we want to do to understand how these certificates work is I first want to talk about symmetric keys versus asymmetric keys. So let's just quickly dive in a little bit to symmetric keys. Symmetric keys are, if you have a symmetric key, this is encrypted with a very simple shift cipher. And if you rotate from by one letter, say S to T, G to H, D to E, you'll see that you can very easily verify that's how you decrypt this message. And what I mean by symmetric keys is that the same rotation shift to encrypt is the same rotation shift to unencrypt, meaning we rotated one letter, we again rotate one letter to decrypt. With asymmetric keys, you have a different mechanism, meaning that one key is used to encrypt the message and a completely different key is used to decrypt the message. So what we can do with this is we can actually take the first key, make it public, and make the second key private. What does that do for us? What that does for us is that we can send, we can encrypt messages with the public key, and the only key that can decrypt it is the private key. And so what that does is only the private key holder can receive that message or decrypt it. And anyone can actually send the message because anyone has access to the public key. Now, if we reverse this, what we get is if we make the first key private and the second key public, we get what is called digital signature. So what does that mean? That means that if I take a message, I can encrypt or sign the message with a private key, and then only the and then anybody with the public key can verify that signature or decrypt it. The other thing we get what is called message integrity. We can validate message integrity is if you take, say, if you're signing a message, you take a message, you sign it, and then you send both the message and its signed or encrypted version to the recipient. The recipient takes the encrypted message, decrypts it, and can compare that to the actual message you sent and validate that the message wasn't changed. Okay, so now that we understand this, what do we do with that in terms of X509 certificates? Well, the contents of the X509 certificate is essentially the messages that we're encrypting or signing. So we have contents meaning who I am and what is my public key. So this is the endpoint that has the certificate with this contents, and then it's signed, digitally signed, so that we can ensure authenticity of the contents of that message that is in the certificate that is assigned to that endpoint. Now, in terms of signing, we could self-sign. So if this is my signature, that means that this is a self-signed root certificate authority, right? And if it is signed by somebody else, then we consider it a sub-CA. And in terms of this signing, what we have is we establish what is called a chain of trust. So let's say we trust the root, and then the root signs another certificate that can be called a sub-CA. And then the sub-CA can sign a third certificate, and that can be your certificate that's assigned to the endpoint. Now, when we say signing, another way to talk about this is issue, meaning that the root CA issues a sub-CA, and the sub-CA issues a server certificate. So when we ask the question, do I trust the server essentially sends its certificate and chain of trust leading to the root to the device. The device has ahead of time the server root CA certificate that's installed on the device. And it uses this root CA certificate to validate the chain of trust. It does not use the root that may have been sent to it. So that's how it validates whether it trusts the server. We can do the same in the opposite direction. The device can send its device certificate and root CA to the server, and the server has ahead of time stored its root CA certificate on its server. So it knows that this device certificate was signed by a chain of trust leading to the device root CA. So these are two different mechanisms that work in both directions, and that's what is similarly used in the Windows example that we started with. This is the Windows root store. It has certificates installed on it. These are the root certificates that your Windows machine trusts. So all of these are basically handled by standards-based protocols. There's many different protocols. I want to start with a security claim that's contained in this, what is called RFC, Request for Comments. So with the internet, request for comments is considered a de facto standard. We have some standards in the internet, but when you get to what is called RFC, Request for Comments, we consider that a de facto standard. So in this standard, we have EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol. What I want to talk about is the security claim, and that's contained in here. I don't want to bog you down with all the words here, so we're going to zoom in to some very specifics. We're saying that in this RFC from 2004, when it refers to mutual authentication, it talks about an interlocked exchange. It specifically states that two independent one-way methods running in opposite directions do not provide mutual authentication. So that's what you saw, what we just showed. We showed a authentication in one direction, server trusting the device, device trusting the server, two independent one-way methods running in opposite directions. So now we're saying that alone does not provide mutual authentication. Let's look a little bit further into TLS. This is again an RFC for TLS. TLS is transport layer security. And again, I don't want to bog you down with the flow here from the RFC. You can go to the RFC to see that. I just want to focus on a couple of things here. You can see that there is a certificate from the server being sent to the client, and there's a certificate from the client being sent to the server. But these asterisks here mean that this is optional. So TLS does not mandate mutual authentication, but it does form the basis for mutual authentication, right? And it's the basis for many protocols. Again, a protocol that you're very familiar with, HTTPS, is how we create trust with an online bank over the internet. And HTTPS uses TLS as the underlying protocol. Now, in this scenario, the certificate that is trusted is actually on the online bank. It is not the device, your Windows machine or other operating system has that root store, and that root store has a chain of trust leading to the certificate that your online bank sent you in this HTTPS exchange. So that is how security is established, but this is only in one direction. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about a few of the protocols that we're going to encounter. We talked about HTTPS, again, TLS based. There is, some of you are familiar with mutual TLS. That's another protocol that's based on TLS, MTLS. We're going to talk about EAP TLS, Extensible Authentication Protocol, Transport Layer Security. And it is actually the basis for PKM v2. PKM v2 is Privacy Key Management version 2, and it's used in WiMAX. Now, on the 4G side, LTE actually uses 4G EPS, aka Authentication and Key Agreement. And in 5G, there is a similar protocol, which is called 5G, aka Authentication and Key Agreement. But what we have in 5G is actually a couple more options. We have EAP, aka Prime, and we also have EAP TLS. So our discussion about EAP TLS will actually be relevant here. So let's now go to this device vulnerability with mutual authentication, which we want to talk about. This is actually a Keysight base station emulator. It's emulating WiMAX. This is a commercial device that connected to this Keysight base station emulator. You can see here in this range here, PKMv2 messages. There's several of them. That is the establishment of mutual authentication where the server and device have exchanged certificates. And it's, again, X509 certificates that were exchanged to establish what appears to be mutual authentication. The device registers, and then it gets service. What we did was we just turned off authentication on this Keysight base station emulator. And what we find is when we turn off authentication, right after basic capabilities exchange, you go straight to the registration and you get service. So this commercial device was able to connect to our Keysight base station emulator just by turning off, despite the fact that device was implementing a mutual authentication using PKMv2, but it basically has a flaw here because, as we said, two one-way methods of X509 certificate exchange are not going to guarantee mutual authentication. So what do we do here? We know that we need a device requirement to fix this. And what we're saying is that it's imperative that the device reject this network if it does not either support authentication or it does not start the PKMv2 exchange. So that's how we fix this in WiMAX. Now, when we look at LTE mutual authentication, again, it was a slightly different protocol. So let's look at that first before I come back to a commercial LTE device. This is the 4G EPS, aka authentication we talked about earlier, and we have a much faster authentication mechanism, meaning that in two messages, authentication request, authentication response, we can establish mutual authentication in LTE. So how does this work? What's happening here is that there is a symmetric key with this secret key K, which is shared on both sides ahead of time. So remember when we were talking about X509 certificates, we said that we needed to establish the root certificates ahead of time. In this case, we have to establish these K values ahead of time. And what happens in this authentication request response is the device and network are sending to each other proof of secret, but not the actual secret itself. Okay, so I'll dig in a little bit here to show you there is a random number sent, and then there is this authentication token sent from the server side to the device side. The random number just randomizes the process so that we don't have replay attacks, and the authentication token is the actual piece that provides proof of secret, and the response from the device provides proof of secret from the device side. So again, we're going to dig in again a little bit, but I just want to focus on that random number here that is generated on the server side. And that random number goes into this F2 function, which is a known function, nothing secret about that. And it produces this expected response because it has with it mixed in the K value that is the secret. The expected response, we did not see that in the messages on the previous slide. So the expected response is not sent over the air. It's kept on the server side, and it's what will be compared to the response that the device sends. Okay. On the so let's go and look at the device side. On the device side, remember, it got that random number. The random number came over in the message, and that random number goes through the same F2 function, and the device has its K value, and it uses that to produce the response. It's able to send the response in that over the air to the network, and the network uses that to show proof of secret. Here you see the 8 EUTN coming in. Again, there's a lot we can talk about, but we're just going to focus high level, as I said. Here is a normal LTE attach with a commercial device on a Keysight base station emulator. You see the authentication request response. This is actually an older phone that we used. And unfortunately, I don't have that phone, so I wasn't able to show the, but a similar thing happened. When you turn off authentication, this device connected. So what do we do in LTE? Again, we need a device requirement. The device requirement essentially says that if you don't see the authentication request for any reason, even despite getting other security messages that we might use on our emulator to try and trick the device, no matter what, if you don't get it, you're going to fail authentication. The only way you can proceed with authentication is if you do get that message, this algorithm ends and you go through normal authentication. So this is the device requirement that should fix that LTE problem. So I was curious to see if a new device has this problem. We took a more recent LTE device, and again, we are using this PRT tool. And so I'm going to show you here a video of PRT operating. And like I said, PRT is a very powerful tool. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect to this device, connect to our base station emulator with PRT. And I just want to pause right here and zoom in to show you that what we see here is that we have an attach complete. Okay, so let's continue with the video here. What we're going to do is with PRT, we can actually go in and change that K value. So what's happening here is we're going to take the K value that's stored on the base station and just put in a bogus number, and then we're going to reconnect our call here. So we turn on the mobile, and we the scripting is controlling on the top. Here's the messaging at the bottom, and then we see here again. I'm just going to pause and zoom in here to show you that we have an authentication failure. Okay, so that checks out because we changed the K value. But now what we're going to do is we are going to turn off authentication. Okay, so what's happening here is we're commenting out authentication security mode commands for both NAS and RRC. That turns that off. We're going to go ahead and start our script again, turn on the device, and then the device is connecting here. And let me just again zoom in to show you what happened. So if you look here, these messages are from the network to the device. There are no messages from the device back. The last message, RFC connection reconfiguration, was not responded to. And I can continue playing the video, but essentially this device does not connect to our rogue base station here. So that's a good implementation from this test perspective. Let's just go to our next slide. So now we're going to look at the second example. We're going to look at privacy in 4G and 5G. With these terms here, 4G IMSI, I'm going to tell you what that is. It's an identifier. I'll spell it out for you shortly, but we have a 5G identifier that's now being used instead of the 4G IMSI. 5G is now specifying this SUPE, and again, the acronym, I'm going to talk about that shortly, but this is our second example with the privacy attack. So again, let's start off with 4G IMSI, International Mobile Subscriber Identity. It's also, the IMSI is also used prior to 4G, but it was continued to be used in 4G. The issue that occurs is that under certain circumstances, the IMSI is sent over the air, and there is no encryption of the IMSI. So whenever the IMSI is sent, it's sent unencrypted. We do have a mechanism called the GUI, and the GUI is shared on both sides. Now, GUI means globally unique temporary identifier. So during establishment of communication, after the initial establishment, this temporary identifier is established so that the home network, HN, home network, it can communicate with the user equipment using the GUI. So it does not need to use the IMSI. However, there are cases where the IMSI is used, and so there are what we call IMSI catchers. Some of you are familiar with that trick the mobile into sending the IMSI and thereby pick up that IMSI. So this is the privacy issue. We want to see how 5G resolves this, right? So again, in 5G, we have what is called the SUPE, Subscriber Permanent Identifier. The U just means unique. So it's 5G globally unique permanent identifier. The ordering just may happen to be the language it was defined in. But again, we have the request response, but here we see a SUSHI. This CI is concealed identifier. So we don't send the SUPE over the air, we send the SUSHI over the air, and the SUSHI is encrypted. So this is where we're providing some privacy protection in 5G. But we want to dig more into that. How much is that really giving us by just encrypting it, right? So again, in 5G, there's the shared GUI on both sides. So that mechanism still exists. So this SUSHI is only sent in certain circumstances. The GUI is used otherwise. But again, the SUSHI is encrypted. So we want to know if that is a problem. Now, I told you we were going to use the WaveJudge. So let's just talk a little bit about the versatility of the WaveJudge. The WaveJudge is an RF sniffer. It is very versatile in that it can decode multiple downlinks and multiple uplinks at the same time. We have a lot of flexibility in that you see the UXM on the left here. So an emulated base station can talk to real devices, or you can have emulated devices talking to real base stations. We even have ORAN over here. It's a very versatile product, but it's also modular and scalable. So this is a one new rack-mounted unit here that has 4 modules in it, and so it's a modular system where this particular module can be configured for 4G. So there's a 4G license that goes on it. And you can also add a 5G license and turn this into a 5G unit. But then we also grow. So it's scalable. So you can have one being a 4G unit, one being a 5G unit. And so modular, scalable, versatile. But versatile also, it is a multi-technology. So while it's doing a 4G, it can do 5G both at the same time. in its sniffing capability. We also have both in-depth PHY analysis, so we're looking at the physical layer, but it also decodes all the messaging, right? We also have this cross correlation, meaning that if you click on this message, it filters the file layer for just that message. So very powerful, versatile tool. And so the question is, back to our 5G privacy, we're going to use this tool to flush that out. But let's talk about privacy protection in 5G. So we said the 4G is not encrypted. 4G MZ is not encrypted. We said that the SUPE is encrypted, right? And the question is, does this protect us against ability to infer uniqueness? Okay, so when we're looking at this question, there's really three questions to answer, and I'm going to take one of them at a time. So let's start with the first question. Is the sushi unique? Okay, why are we asking this question? Because if you have a SUPE and you encrypt it to a sushi and the sushi is unique, right? Then the sushi is a unique identifier that's tied to the SUPE. So that we wanted a unique SUPE, but now we have a unique sushi. So that doesn't really, then we can just go around doing sushi catching instead of SUPE catching or IMSI catching, right? So uniqueness is important here. So the question is it unique? And the answer is no, okay? A new sushi is generated at the UE each time a sushi is transmitted. This ensures that the sushi is never the same for a specific SUPE, okay? So the second question we asked is, how often does this sushi change? And we just answered that. The answer is, it changes every time the sushi is sent. It's going to change, okay? Every single time it is sent. That is how it works in 5G. And then, of course, we have our last question here is, can we decrypt the sushi? So we're talking about uniqueness. We're talking about how often it changes. Well, if we can decrypt the sushi, then we don't care about those first two questions, right? If we can decrypt it, then we don't care. So can we decrypt the sushi? To answer this question, we really need to look at how is the SUPE encrypted, okay? So let's do that. Let's start off with the sushi format here. There's a SUPE type, home network identifier, routing indicator, protection scheme ID. Now this protection scheme ID can take all 0 values called the null value. If you have the null value, that means you have no protection, okay? The null value means no protection. So remember this protection scheme ID. And then I want you to remember this as well. Home network, again, HN is the home network. So this is the HN public key ID, okay? This is being sent in the sushi, the public key of the home network. Then there is a scheme output here. The scheme output has ephemeral public key here. ECC is elliptic curve cryptography. We want to talk about this, okay? Let's come back to it in a second. The ciphertext here is the SUPE. So you take the SUPE, you encrypt it into a ciphertext value, and it goes here. The ciphertext is the encrypted SUPE, all right? And then you have a MAC tag value for integrity protection. So again, I said we wanted to talk about this elliptic curve cryptography. Let's take a quick detour and we'll come right back to our sushi encryption question, okay? We're going to talk about elliptic curve just to dig a little deeper, okay? What is elliptic curve cryptography? Okay, so before we talk about elliptic curve, let's talk about RSA. RSA is Rivas, Shamir, and Edelman. Those are the authors of this protocol. It's essentially asymmetric cryptography. So it uses public-private key pairs. And it does that, I'm talking very high level. I'm not going to go into detail here. You essentially have two large prime numbers. You multiply them together and you get the the value n ends up as the key length, okay? So n also becomes part of the public key, but the question here is factoring n difficult? Because when we talk about encryption, we're really talking about one-way functions, meaning that when we encrypt, we have a function that encrypts, and then the reverse function that decrypts is in the opposite direction. Is supposed to be harder than the encryption process, right? So that's what we mean by one-way functions, and that's what we're talking about difficulty. Difficulty is how difficult is it to decrypt something that we encrypted, right? And that's what the attackers are trying to do, is they're trying to solve a difficult problem. That's going to talk to the strength of RSA, but really what we're talking about is the strength of elliptic curve. So we'll come back to this. We're going to look at elliptic curve. Elliptic curve integrated encryption scheme, ECIES, is the actual encryption scheme being used by 5G for encrypting the SUPE, okay? So, but we want to know how that happens. Again, we don't have time to dig in, so I'm giving you very, very high level of elliptic curve. Let's say Bob has a secret value X, and then Bob sends a public key of his secret key, G of X, okay? So he raised it by a power. In order to get back the X from here, we need to take a logarithm, okay? And taking logarithms is supposed to be difficult because this is actually a discrete logarithm. This is a discrete problem. Elliptic curve is done on finite fields that are we're using discrete mathematics here, okay? So again, I don't want to bog you to just stick with me. There's a secret value that Alice has, okay? And she also creates a public value with this power. So remember, she has this public value from Bob. She's able to put that into this key derivation function. This is public, nothing secret about this. But then she's able to derive a secret value K. So this will stay secret, and we will use it in a encryption scheme that is public to create a ciphertext from a message, okay? The K value is secret, not the encryption scheme. The encryption scheme is public. So she's able to send that ciphertext over, and you'll see what Bob is able to do. Because he has her public key, he's able to use that same public key derivation function to gain the secret that she derived without actually having the secret go over the air. And then again, using a public decryption scheme, recover back the message. Okay, so we want to go back to the comparison with RSA. We said that elliptic curve has similar encryption strength with a much smaller key length, okay? So for the same amount of encryption strength, you can use smaller keys. That means that if you use the same size key, of course, you get much stronger encryption with an elliptic curve. Can we break elliptic curve? Okay, so what I'll say is for elliptic curve is considered strong encryption. Okay, or you have two extremes. We have no encryption, and you have unbreakable at the other end. And for those of you who work unbreakable, you know that this is difficult to implement. So for most of the commercial world, strong encryption is what we want, right? And so what we know here, what we can say is that elliptic curve is much stronger than RSA. So I'm very glad to see 5G using this elliptic curve, much stronger encryption, and all. That's what I'll say about that. Okay, so let's now go back to our topic of encrypting the SUPE. Okay, again, another busy diagram. Stay with me. I'm going to try to simplify this for you. On the left side is the SUPE encryption this is on the device side, and on the right hand side we have the network side. Okay, so remember we said on the fly you're going to generate a public private key pair. Okay, so that is an ephemeral public key and an ephemeral private key. We also have a public private key pair for the home network. Remember that again from that from the sushi fields that we showed. There's a public key of the home network and the private key of the home network, right? So what that does is that what the public key of the home network on the UE side does to this key agreement section here can be undone on the right hand side only with the private key, and only the home network has this private key. Now, this public ephemeral key that was generated on the fly is sent over to this to the home network, and that we saw again was in the sushi, that ephemeral public key, right? And what that does to this section here, it's essentially able to undo what this private key did over here on the left side. So now we have the key agreements on both sides being able to derive the same shared ephemeral key and get to the same point with a symmetric key on both sides that is essentially the same. Okay, now since they both have this symmetric key, they can use the symmetric key. The UE can use the symmetric key to encrypt the SUPE. The SUPE goes in, it converts into that ciphertext, and remember that ciphertext was the one that was in the sushi that was sent over to the home network. The home network can take that ciphertext with the same encryption key and decrypt it. Why did I go through all of this? Because I am going to ask the question now, what if we can get to this symmetric key? And that's what we were looking at here at Keysight. Can we get that shared key? So if we look at, this is a requirement, and I'm just going to shed away most of it to just focus on these words here. The calculation of the sushi shall be performed either by the USIM or by the mobile equipment. So 3GPP is essentially saying that the implementation of the sushi calculation is not completely specified. So that means that if the mobile equipment gets that encrypted that encryption key, and if the mobile is the one that's going to calculate that sushi using that shared encryption that comes out of the SIM, well, that's what we would like to do with the Cipher Judge, right? So we're researching this. We would like to see if we can grab that encryption key as it passes between the SIM card and the mobile equipment. If in cases where people have implementations where the mobile equipment is performing that calculation, okay? So obviously that's going to be many different kinds of implementations that could be out there since 3GPP did not nail this down. What other vulnerable points exist? So the SUPE actually has cases where it's not encrypted. So in the standards, a UE making unauthenticated emergency session does not have to be encrypted if there is no GUI established for public LAN mobile network, PLMN, for those of you that are familiar with that. So that's one case. Another case we have here, again, that null scheme. Remember that I called out earlier, home network, HN, has, if it doesn't configure a scheme, instead, if it uses the null scheme, then the SUPE is sent in the clear, right? So there's another case point of attack. Here's a third case here. The home network has not provisioned that public key that is needed to generate the sushi. So if that public key of the home network, remember I said HN public key, that was on the left-hand side of that diagram. If it's not provisioned to the device, then the device sends an unencrypted SUPE. Okay, so 3 cases here where we can attack. What other attack surfaces do we have that we see in the standard? Well, we'd like to look at this one. This is provisioning and updating of the home network public key can be implemented in an OTA mechanism. OTA is over the air mechanism. So if you're going over the air, that's a surface we can attack. And if you're interested in that, we definitely would love to partner with you in research in that area. Another attack surface here, subscriber privacy enablement shall be under the control of the home network. So what can we do here? Perhaps, again, if there's ways that we can trick the subscriber into connecting to a fake home network, then we have control then of this privacy enablement. Another area of research we'd like to pursue. So I want to summarize here what we talked about in securing that attack surface. In 5G, we showed you PRT, okay? So PRT is a tool we have, and it's very flexible. You saw that we can change parameters, do a lot of different things with it, and that works with the UXM, our base station emulator, right? So that's PRT. We also showed you the Cipher Judge, and what we would like to do is ask the question, what else can we do with the Cipher Judge? We showed you a couple of different things. We saw that there were many implementations on the device side. So there's a lot of opportunity here to study manufacturers' implementations. Maybe manufacturers themselves would like to take a look at this. So that's the Cipher Judge that we showed you that Keysight has. And essentially, what other attack examples can we explore? We just showed you 2 examples. These are very powerful equipment that can be used in very flexible ways and to conduct different basic security research. And not just that, Keysight's always developing new tools, right? So we're pushing the envelope, we're doing research. What other tools would you like to see from us, right? So we definitely would like to partner with you in your research, and definitely we would all like to benefit from that partnership to research with you what security problems you'd like to look at within 5G. So thank you for listening to this presentation, and I will now move to a Q&A, the Q&A section. So
Kumi,
yes.
Kumi, hi, it's Leslie. I'm just going to launch a poll right now before you go into that.
Okay, sure. Go ahead,
Great,
Leslie.
thanks. This is just a short poll, everyone. You could just answer that. I'd appreciate it. And then Kumi, while we're waiting, we do have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, let me take a look here and see. I'll
give it another couple seconds.
Okay. Yes, I see some good questions, some people answering. That's very good, very good. I see.
And we do have an evaluation that'll come up in the web browser at the end if you have other comments that you need to write in. I know you can't do that in the poll, but you can certainly do that in the very short evaluation. Okay, it looks like we've got a good mix of this, so I will close the poll and you can take it away for questions and answers.
Okay, I'm just gonna, I'm looking at this question here. Would roaming devices throw the SUPE in the clear on its first attach? So that's a very good question. So my understanding is, and we can take a look at that, it's definitely a very good question to ask. My understanding is that you would have established a roaming agreement, right? And so with that established roaming agreement, the roaming partner would hand the sushi back to the home network. So the roaming partner doesn't need to figure this out. So the sushi can still be used in a roaming scenario where the sushi would be handed back to the home network. The home network would perform the authentication and send that confirmation back to the serving network. So that actually, I'm glad you asked this question because there is a additional feature of security called authentication confirmation that was added in 5G compared to 4G. So my understanding again is that in the case of a roaming scenario, you would still be using the sushi. So, but very good question. Let me see here. Is the sushi similar to the TIMSI? Okay, that's a very good question. For those of you, I know some of you are evolving. It's great to have this evolution. We've gone through so many different technologies. Now, the TIMSI is a temporary mobile subscriber identity, and it came about prior to the GUI. So the TIMSI is actually similar to the GUI. So I would relate those two. The sushi is really more aligned with the IMSI, right? So if you want to align those two in your head, I know we have lots and lots of algorithms, so it's very good to match them up with older technologies. So I would match the TIMSI with the GUI, and the sushi you should just relate it with the IMSI. So good question there. Here's a really interesting question. Let me take this one. So part of the 5G is ultra low latency. The idea of EPS AKA has a setup time for security. How does this impact latency? Is the security different for low latency applications? Very, very good question. Okay, so I'm guessing that this so this probably came from the idea that we had a shorter key length, and then we also had for elliptic curve, but we also had AKA being 2 messages, whereas ETLS being a whole bunch of messages, right? So latency is definitely a question. I actually right now don't know the answer to this, but the reason I find this interesting is I was looking into this. So we'd like to take this back and dig a little deeper on this. But I wanted to mention it because that's a good question. I have that question myself. In the ultra low latency situations where you're, say, doing ad hoc, how does that authentication work, and how fast it is, and would we go with a ETLS? So another question here: what is the advantage of having smaller key length? Okay, so I guess that's maybe related to this question as well. So smaller key length. The advantage of having smaller key length is processing, speed and processing of the encryption. But that doesn't mean that we should go to smaller key length. So it just depends on how efficient chipsets can process elliptic curve, and then you want to judge that against how much strength of protection you want. So obviously, elliptic curve is strong encryption, You can make it obviously stronger by going to much larger key lengths. There's actually a whole topic I can talk about this relating to I think the Zimmerman case that I think did not end up going to the Supreme Court. As far as I know, we still are able to, well, we can try it if any of you want to go to the Supreme Court, maybe do unbreakable, so to speak. But good question. Let me see. Shall we take? Maybe we'll take just one more here. In your example, how does the device know that GX from the network is not from a rogue network? Okay, I think I can go back. I don't know if to that. How does so you? I thought we actually covered this, so maybe it wasn't clear. So how does the device know that GX from the network is not a rogue network, right? The establishment of the trust is established in one of two ways. The establishment of the trust is through the shared key, right? In LTE, it is that there's a K value on here, which is not this key. Okay, there's a K value on here that's not this key. So that maybe that's what caused the problem. Actually, I appreciate the question now. The K value that we showed earlier is part of the AKA process. That is not what's going on here. This is encryption of the SUPE. So we want to keep them separate. And I'm glad you asked the question, because the encryption of the SUPE is completely independent to our authentication. So our examples that we used in PRT, that was our first example attack, that talked about establishing the trust. Here we are now, after this trust is established, we're now using an elliptic curve to encrypt the sushi. So I hope if you when you get the video, go back through those slides again, and I hope that clears that up. But I'm glad you asked the question. Those are two very different things, and I see we're over the hour.
Right.
So I think I want to thank everybody for coming, and I hand it back to the moderator.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kumi, and thank you all for attending. As I put in the chat, I'll be sending out the recording and the slides to everyone who attended, and thanks again for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.